You know, believe it or not, I was kind of a stupid little nerd as a kid. I know. You see this figure of perfect hypnotic masculinity, and you think to yourself, you? A nerd? Surely not. Surely, no way. There's no way. But I'm here to tell you, it's true. Along with the absolutely batshit amount of cartoons that I was watching from Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Toon Disney, and Disney Channel growing up, I also found myself constantly watching National Geographic, Animal Planet, Discovery, History Channel, anything I could for new shows. And all this new content was too much for my little brain to handle. My head was literally overflowing. We had brain matter leaking out of my ears. We had to scoop little Isaiah brain oatmeal off the carpet so that I didn't end up licking windows on a small bus with a helmet requirement. I was all over all of these shows. Steve Irwin and the most extreme on Animal Planet, I would have died for the Crocodile Hunter. Shark Week on Discovery, I watched that shit every year, bro. And don't even get me started on a little program on the History Channel called MonsterQuest. I mean, you could go ahead and get me started if you want, because that's what we're talking about today. MonsterQuest was different from all of the other nature shows I was watching as a kid, because unlike the shows on Animal Planet or Shark Week on Discovery that all dealt with real animals, well, I mean, they did when I was a kid, MonsterQuest dealt a little bit more in the realm of the unknown by focusing on creatures known as cryptids. Now, for those of you who don't know what a cryptid is, cryptids are creatures that may or may not exist in the wild and whose current existence is disputed or unsubstantiated by science. Examples of this would be the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, the Jersey Devil, the Mothman, the Michigan Dogman, and many others. You know, lots of weird little freaks like that. Some cryptids also aren't wholly new animals, but animals we believe to be extinct, like dinosaurs. There are a few examples of this, like the Loch Ness Monster and Champ, who many believe are descendants of plesiosaurs. There's also the Mokele Mbembe, a cryptid said to inhabit the valleys of the Congo that resembles a modern sauropod. That's just a fancy word for a long-necked dinosaur. I just felt like being pretentious. Now, I'll talk about my current personal opinions on cryptids in a little while, but just know that as a kid, this show absolutely rocked my shit. As a dumb little child, I sometimes had a hard time differentiating between documentaries on TV that were telling the whole truth and the ones that liked to stretch the truth a little bit. Because obviously, up until this point, every documentary that I had ever seen, I had been led to believe was giving me true information. So once MonsterQuest started presenting these creatures to me as if they were actual living, breathing creatures, I strapped in for the ride. I was ready to go. I put that shit on auto record on my DVR, and I remember my mom opening it up one day and being like, who the fuck has all these episodes of MonsterQuest on here? I forgot about this show for years. Until recently, when I started to get these weird recommendations for finding Bigfoot and mountain monsters, and then I started to wonder whatever happened to the original show that walked so that these shows could, well, not run, but like take a bunch of quick, clumsy steps in rapid succession and then not fall down a bunch of times. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like that a little bit. But today, I want to share this show with you. I went back and watched a few episodes, and I'm going to talk about it for a little bit. And you can sit back and listen for a little while if you want to. Like, you don't have to, but if you want. Hold on a second. Did you guys hear that? It sounds like...
Witnesses around the world report seeing monsters. Science searches for answers on MonsterQuest.
So every episode of MonsterQuest is formatted pretty similarly. The first part of the episode is usually front-loaded with historical facts about whatever cryptid it is that they're covering. This will cover things like the legends that perhaps inspired the cryptid, the first historical sightings, the record of historical sightings, and then eyewitness accounts and things like that. I absolutely love this part of every episode. It's fantastic. Because even if you don't believe in the cryptids, it does provide some pretty interesting historical information. The dramatic reenactments of the eyewitness stories are cheesy and goofy and fun, and they have these awful, horrible CGI monsters. The second part of every episode, though, has the boring or the bad part, and this is usually the expedition phase. Every episode has a substantial amount of the show's 48-minute runtime dedicated to an expedition that will try to go off and find whatever cryptid it is that they're covering. And like the traps that they set up and the way they try to capture the monsters, as well as the technology they use, is all kind of neat. But obviously this part is stupid for a number of reasons. The most obvious of these is that if History Channel discovered, I don't know, Bigfoot, they're not just gonna bury that in an episode of MonsterQuest, right? That would have been global news. People would be talking about that shit immediately and constantly. Like, hey, remember the time MonsterQuest caught Bigfoot. It's not to say that MonsterQuest never found anything interesting though. Credit where it's due. In 2008, during the filming of its 16th episode of its second season, entitled Giant Squid Ambush, the show actually managed to get one of the first documented videos of a giant squid. So that is pretty cool. So the first episode we're going to be talking about today is the debut episode of the show. This episode surrounds Champ, a lake monster that may or may not be lurking at the bottom of Lake Champlain, a lake that makes up a large portion of the northern border between Vermont and New York. According to eyewitness reports, Champ very closely resembles what we think of as a plesiosaur. This isn't unlike a lot of the accounts of the Loch Ness Monster. Now, of course, your first instinct is to disregard this. A lake monster, you say? How absurd. But hold on a second. Don't be so quick to judge, all right? Because look at this. Sandra Mancy, a supposed eyewitness, has a photo from 1978 where she documented the creature, and it has stood up to scientific scrutiny to this day. That's pretty damning, isn't it? According to the show, Samuel D. Champlain, the lake's namesake and the monster's namesake, was the first to spot the monster, writing in his journal that he saw a massive 20-foot serpent with the head of a horse. This account would be the first of over 250 sightings over the years. Then the show talks to Christine Hebert, an eyewitness who apparently saw Champ slither out of the woods and into the lake, indicating that Champ is able to both land walk and lake swim. But then we do a complete 180 on everything here. We compare Sandra Mancy's photo to the photo from 1933 of the Loch Ness Monster, which I was very surprised to find out is a giant f***ing hoax. Yeah, apparently the super famous photo of the supposed Loch Ness Monster is just a toy submarine. And guess when it was debunked? 1993. Okay, I was born in 1997. I've been looking at this picture my whole life thinking that that's the one thread of evidence we have for the Loch Ness Monster, and it was debunked 30 years ago. Color me embarrassed. But after this little comparison, the show brings in a skeptic, Benjamin Radford. He's a writer for a magazine called Skeptic Inquirer. Radford shows this really interesting rendering of a decomposing log at the bottom of a lake. See, even though really heavy pieces of wood will sink to the bottom of a lake or river, as they decompose, those air bubbles that come from decomposition will sometimes cause the wood to temporarily float to the surface of the river or the lake. And when this happens and it shoots up suddenly, it can look pretty startling. And then with that in mind, as you take a look at the Mancy photograph, you could reasonably suspect that it might just be a tree stump that shot to the surface and then went back down. It's pretty unrelated, but when we were watching this episode together, my girlfriend took a look at this picture and she was like, that's a fucking whale penis. And I was like, what? And she showed me a picture. Yeah, it looks a lot like a whale penis. But I mean, it's not, because they're in a lake and not the ocean, but you know, I mean, or are they? The episode then returns to the written account of Samuel D. Champlain. Surely this account still holds up to scrutiny, right? It's the very first written account of a Champ sighting. Well, no, actually, it doesn't. Despite the fact that many people claim that Champlain saw a massive 20-foot creature that resembles the water horse, his written account, when you really look at it, is actually pretty timid. I'll go ahead and just play the clip from the show because it's pretty explanatory.
Champlain's actual description doesn't say anything about a serpent. Instead, it says this: there is a great abundance of fish, the largest of them from 8 to 10 feet long, with a snout 2 feet long and a double row of sharp, dangerous teeth. It is protected by scales of a silvery gray color so strong that a dagger could not pierce them.
A long gray fish, you say, that can get 6 to 8 feet long even, maybe 10 feet sometimes, with really thick skin and a long snout? I feel like I've seen that before. Oh, right. Yeah, it's a sturgeon. It's a sturgeon. This dude saw a fish, thought it was cool, wrote about it in his journal, and then because people in the 1600s have brains that were the consistency of cream of wheat, we thought that we saw a sea monster. But what about the eyewitness account of Christine Hebert? Surely she actually saw Champ slither out of the woods and into the lake, right? Right? You can't be telling me that's not true. I mean, I don't doubt that she saw something. She had to have. That's a pretty crazy thing to just like make up, right? But the idea that it was Champ seems less than unlikely. Paleontology records don't indicate that the plesiosaur was capable of moving on land. Furthermore, they were barely capable of lifting their heads for an extended period of time based on their bone structure. So in all of those sightings where Champ or the Loch Ness Monster are seen raising their heads out of the lake, I mean, the plesiosaur just didn't have the ability to do that. Now, there's 65 million years separating the cryptid of today and the plesiosaur of 65 million years ago before the KT extinction. But there's no fossil record indicating that the plesiosaur survived the KT extinction anywhere in the world, much less any evidence of any evolutionary changes to the vertebrae in their necks. The show then goes into its expedition phase, which of course turns up absolutely nothing. They use sonar, deep sea cameras, and cameras on the coast near the most common sighting locations. I have to say though, this is kind of a good introduction so far. The show is doing a good job of bringing both people in who are very passionate about cryptozoology and skeptics and scientists who bring the show to a more grounded level. Sure, yeah, it's dramatizing some of the details, but it's not trying to actively mislead or lie to you quite yet, like Finding Bigfoot or Mountain Monsters is. The next episode we're going to be examining here is a little bit different. Since cryptids by definition are creatures whose current existence isn't fully backed by science, sometimes the line between fantasy and reality can become a bit ambiguous. Are ghosts cryptids? What about vampires? Or zombies? Or werewolves? The 14th episode of the first season, titled Legend of the American Werewolf, explores the cryptid shared both by my state and the neighboring state of Wisconsin. And that cryptid is the Michigan Dogman. Now here, there's still some interesting historical stories about werewolves and those who believe themselves to be werewolves. In the very beginning, the episode tells the story of Peter Stump. Stump lived in the 1500s, and his werewolf trial was one of the most famous trials of the werewolf witch trials that took place between the 1400s and the 1700s. He confessed to eating and killing 14 children, as well as 2 pregnant women and their fetuses. He claimed that the devil had given him a magic belt that allowed him to turn into a wolf. He was then executed by being broken at the wheel and then beheaded. This episode contains a lot more eyewitness accounts than the last episode had, likely to make up for the fact that there weren't a whole lot of experts that wanted to show up on this one. However, all of these eyewitness accounts are just amazing. The first eyewitness we're going to talk about is a man named Mark Kirschnick, an artist from Wisconsin. He was just driving down the road one day when he came face to face with what he could only describe as a wolfman. Kirschnick was so damaged by this encounter that he began channeling the wolfman into all of his art that he made to retain some sort of semblance of control of his reality. And to me, that definitely sounds like somebody who thinks they saw a wolfman. There's another eyewitness in this episode, a woman named Katie Zahn, who agrees to a lie detector test regarding her story. A test that she passes, by the way. And of course, that doesn't mean that her story is true. It just means that she believes it to be true. And the guy who gives the polygraph test is very, very careful to make his language as clear as possible, to make it look like he doesn't necessarily believe that she saw a werewolf or like a wolf man.
The conclusion on Katie Zahn's polygraph was no deception indicated. It's my opinion that she was being truthful about seeing 3 animals walking on their hind legs down at the base of that bridge by the creek.
I just love that he's trying so hard to be so professional about it. We also have a first-hand account from somebody who's regularly on the show, a hunter named Don Young. Don Young claims that since 2002, he has seen the Wolfman not once, not twice, but 5 times, and that 3 of those sightings were in the year prior to the filming of this episode. He goes on to tell the story of one of his most recent sightings, a story about how he's out hunting in the woods and he sees something out in the distance on the trail. And I just love the reasons that he gives for not shooting what he saw. I'm gonna play it right now. Just watch.
Well, the main reason I didn't shoot at this thing was, one, it wasn't bear season, it was deer season. So if it was a bear, I would have been a poacher if I would have shot it, because I didn't have no bear license in the first place. 2, if it was what I had suspected at the time as being a guy in a monkey suit, well, then it would have been murder.
The man said, yeah, I mean, it'd be cool if I killed the wolf man, but the chances were just as likely that it was a man in a monkey suit. And honestly, it's just a little refreshing that even though these people are a little bit out there and kind of weird, they're not like absolute lunatics. But ultimately, this episode is a decline from the first. There's no true dissenting opinion here. And once we reach the halfway point, there really isn't anything else to say about the wolf man. Sure, we can watch Don Young and his scientist sidekick wander the woods for 10 minutes, while they do absolutely nothing during the expedition portion of this episode. But I mean, it ends the same way every other Monster Quest episode ends. Aw, gee, we didn't catch the Wolfman this time, but, you know, hey, watch next week and we might almost not catch the megalodon, but we can't catch it if you don't watch. So watch it, because if you don't watch, we're not going to catch it. So you have to watch. The last episode we're going to talk about today is the 9th episode of the 2nd season, which deals with the first-hand accounts and stories of the Chupacabra. This was the only episode that I had seen before I started this video, and this episode fucked me up as a kid. I remember one of the first-hand accounts in particular. There's a man who's chased into his house by a Chupacabra and stalked when he goes back inside, and the image of it looking into his house gave me nightmares for months. I do love that this episode posits that since there are reports of a 2-legged Chupacabra and a 4-legged Chupacabra, that maybe they're 2 different species being used with the same name. So essentially there's 2 cryptids here. It's a 2-for-1 deal here. This was also one of the few episodes of Monster Quest I ever saw when I was a kid that appears to give a substantial amount of physical evidence, with not just 1, but 3 separate Chupacabra corpses being shown to us, both in photographs and in one case, an actual physical head. The thing is, though, is that these aren't Chupacabra corpses. 2 of the bodies were found in Texas and 1 in Puerto Rico. When the hair samples from all 3 corpses were analyzed under laboratory conditions, they were all determined to be from at least similar species. But the episode never tells us which species, despite the fact that they were sent to an animal hair expert. And that's likely because they were just dogs with mange. I mean, the episode doesn't tell us that they were dogs with mange, but when you Google images of coyotes with mange, they look basically exactly like these things. However, they also sent the available tissue samples that they could to a lab, but those results were inconclusive, because as the researcher explains,
if you take it from a dead animal, the blood supply is no longer supporting the skin, it's no longer giving nutrition to the skin, and so the piece of tissue is dead.
And that prevented man's cell from making a determination of mange. Though it's possible the animal did have the condition.
The little expedition section of this episode is also pretty pitiful. The crew essentially buried a lot of rotting meat in different areas of a large property in Texas, but the only thing they managed to capture was a possum. And then when they came back the next day and they saw that all their meat had been eaten and dug up, they were like, "Whoa, what do you think happened to all this meat, guys? Where'd it go?" And it's like, I don't know, dude. You buried a bunch of f***ing rotting meat in the woods. Of course an animal's gonna get it. What do you think is gonna happen? I mean, I've dug my fair share of rotted meat out of the dirt in the woods. It happens. You come across it. You take it, you put a little in your pocket, you save it for later. You cook it up over the fire. Kills all the germs and shit. There's also not a whole lot of historical stories here. And after doing some research, I found out that was because the legend of the Chupacabra actually started in 1995. I thought this was like other cryptids and like based off of an old myth or something, but no, it's less than 30 years old. That's just kind of crazy to me. I don't know. So at the end of it all, what do we really have to say about History Channel's Monster Quest? I mean, it's fine. That's it. I mean, like, it's fine. It's good. It's decent, I guess. Like I said, the moments where there's real, actual information being conveyed to us, there's some interesting stuff happening here. It's pretty watchable. However, this and every other cryptid shows need to go out into the woods and like try to find the creature or whatever just drags everything else down. It's always a little drawn out and a little stupid, and of course they don't catch it, because if they had, you would have heard about it by now, right? I love the idea of these creatures, and I love to think that these little freaks are just hanging out as pure, unadulterated forces of nature that can't be captured or caught or located because they don't want to be, because they're more powerful than that, because there's something about them that we just don't or will never understand. And I definitely believe that there's a whole lot of things in nature that we don't fully understand or even know about yet. However, when there's no fossil record for these creatures, when we've never found a dead body or a bone or something that they've preyed on, when we've never examined any kind of hair or tissue samples that would indicate a new species, you sometimes begin to wonder, if there's no evidence, then why would you believe at all? And my answer to that is because it's fun. It's fun to believe these little weirdos are out there in the woods, just wreaking havoc, just doing whatever they want to do. All I'm saying is that it's fun to believe in this stuff, and it's really cool, and the stories behind them are always interesting. But it's also probably a good idea to take these accounts and their supposed evidence with a grain of salt, at least until something more substantial appears. And then we can begin to take it just a little more seriously. But until then, it's just a lot of fun, and that's awesome too. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Leave a comment letting me know what your favorite cryptid is, or leave me a story about one that you have. That's all I have for you. My name is Isaiah, and thank you for watching my video.